listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. It's another episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. So glad to have you joining us again this week. This one is a new one for me, everybody. This interview is with someone who I don't know at all. The first of many of these kinds of interviews. This was an amazing first run. And I just want to thank Holli for being brave enough. She knew me, but I didn't know her, or she knew of me. And you'll hear the story in our conversation. But what an incredible talk we had. And I just love how this podcast brings these moms together and we just talk about the side of motherhood that we really don't get to share often. Normally it's like, hey, can you pick up my kid from here? Or, you know, so-and-so is sick. What should I do? Do you have a pediatrician that you recommend? Or whatever the case is, we don't just get to sit and talk with one another about what it is like to be a mom, what it was like for our entrance into motherhood, for the things that we have experienced along the way, just from a mother's perspective, not seeking advice, not trying to figure things out, but really just sharing where we've been, what we've gone through. And so you are going to really enjoy this conversation with Holli. I know I did. I enjoyed it while it was happening. So I know that you're going to enjoy listening. And again, I'm just going to ask you, would you mind sharing this with other moms who you think would enjoy being a part of our conversation about the motherhood experience? Text them the episode, email it to them, fax them if you're still super old fashioned. You know, it's so funny. A previous episode, I said something about sharing the episodes, and I mentioned yodeling, and I got a text message. You know who you are, saying, I'm yodeling. Can you hear me? And I thought that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So however you can share the motherhood experience with your friends, colleagues, family members, whoever it is who's a mom who would appreciate hearing these stories, feel free to share it with them. And without further ado, please meet my guest and new friend, Holli Bromenshenkel. Welcome, everyone, to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I am so thrilled to have you meet and me meet, essentially, at the same time. Today's guest, Holli, is it Bromenshenkel?
Bromenshenkel.
Bromenshenkel.
That's very good. Yes.
I thought
yes.
I should have prepared at least that much beforehand. So, Holli, you know, on the Motherhood Experience, I like to start every episode with ages of kids and stages of parenting you're in. So why don't we start with that?
Yes. So thank you for having me, Val.
Yes.
We have 4 kids. My husband's name is Andy. He and I have 4 kids. Claire is our oldest. She is 12, will be 13 this May. Henry is about to turn 11. And we have twin boys, Luke and Will, who are 8, and they will turn 9 in May.
So our kids are kind of like
We have similar,
stair-stepping, I think,
mm-hmm.
right behind mm-hmm. one another. So
yes.
Tell me, and I'm interested in this story, but tell our guests,
yes.
really, I should
yes.
say,
Thanks.
How is it that you are familiar with me?
Sure. So it's through Tracy, who I forget which episode she was on, but our mutual friend Tracy. Somewhere along the line in social media, well, I went to high school with Tracy.
Okay.
She graduated a year ahead of me, so that's how I know Tracy.
Okay.
And then somewhere, gosh, 10, 11, 12 years ago, maybe, she must have been sharing a blog that you were doing or something. And there must have been some humor in it or something that I just felt like I could relate to, or I enjoyed how you wrote. And blogging was much more, I feel like, how I connected with people at that time, instead of like an Instagram post or something like, or a Facebook post even. It was more checking out blogs, I guess. And so I honestly don't know. I don't know. I just something about how you wrote, and I don't even know really what the topics were at that time. But then, yeah, I feel like I just kind of followed things that you were doing, and then either I disconnected from you somehow, or maybe you just left social media, or maybe it kind of happened similarly. Um, so I hadn't heard your name in a while, which is a weird thing to say, I guess, for someone I don't know at all anyway. But then Tracy was on the podcast and shared her episode of your podcast. And I thought, this is Val from Val's Mind Mumbles. And I was like, she has a podcast, and so anyway, that's sort of the rambling version of, I guess, how I feel like I know you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I love how, so Tracy gets like a #1 fan award. She's listened to every episode. She
Yes.
has advocated for the podcast.
Yes.
And she kind of put a call out there, like, if you're a mom
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
are willing to just talk, like, get in touch with Val or get in touch with me. And so
Hmm.
Tracy connected us, and I
Hmm.
emailed you, and I got the absolute best email response I think I've ever. I mean, it was certainly noteworthy, to say the least, and I loved it so much. I laughed out loud, and I thought, well, this is going to be fun. So
Oh, that's
I'm
great. I love
I'm
that.
so glad that you were willing to do this. And so I knew that Tracy was our mutual connection, but kind of
Hmm.
having you fill in the gaps then is great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got 4, just
Hmm.
1 girl. The oldest is your girl.
Yes. She
Okay.
was born for that role.
Same.
Yeah.
Oh, same. And so when you and your husband got together, like, was motherhood something that was always in your future, in your cards?
Yeah. In fact, I often really only thought about like becoming a wife and a mom. I didn't, like, in school, we would do, it was different 20 something years ago, where you would take like a little computer test and your interests would line
Right.
you up somewhere. And I was like, what does any of this even matter? Like, I don't really
Mm.
want a job. I don't want to,
Mhm.
like, not a job. I don't want to work like outside, maybe. I just like want to be a wife and be a mom. And I don't know, maybe I'll be a teacher, or maybe so I felt like, yes, being a wife and a mom was always very important to me. And my husband is one of 6, and I am one of 3. Um, and he's the baby by many years,
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm the oldest. So it's very like his family is all, I won't say much older than us in case they listen to this. But his 5 siblings were all very close in age, and then he came along many years later. So his dynamic was, he's kind of part of a big family, but he sort of grew up as an only child in some ways, because everyone was
Sure.
sort of out of the house by then. And so I don't know that when we had conversations, it was probably a lot of me like talking at him about like how great it would be to have a big family, or big-ish, and all. And I don't know that he really even understood the concept of that, really, because he didn't have close near siblings kind of running around with him all the time. So um yeah, but I always knew I wanted to be a mom, and um thankfully that was in the cards from God too.
Yeah.
So
I resonate with that. In From being in school, I remember the ASVAB test,
oh,
and like, for some reason I understood that whatever you did on that test, you were going to be recruited into the armed services and like forced into this position that you tested well in. And I was like, I've never wanted to fail a test in my life, but I do not want to do well on this. And motherhood was not one of the testing categories on that test.
exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
that's so
funny.
true. So
So,
true.
uh, were the twins a surprise? Do twins run in
Yes,
your family at all?
not really. No, not really on either side of our families. Not in such a way that it would have been like it's our turn or it's expected or anything like that. There's a couple of different multiples in different spots within both of our families, but not anything recurring. And so it's actually kind of a funny story, because we were trying for our third, and found out that we were pregnant with our third. And uh, I had always kind of said 4 would be maybe like our magic number in my head, because we had 3 in my family, and I just feel like someone was always left out or odd or whatever.
Okay.
And so it was, I don't know, between the time that we already knew we were pregnant, and Andy and I were talking about, and he just kind of said something along the lines of like, I just really feel like this is our last pregnancy. So like, you better pray for twins or something like that. He said twins. And we laughed and whatever. And in my brain, I was like, yeah, right. We'll like all decide when we're it was just kind of a funny, like, okay, honey, and then because so our daughter was born just a little bit early, and we just didn't really know why. And so with our subsequent pregnancies after that, I always had an ultrasound pretty much as soon as we knew we were pregnant, just to make sure that the timing was what we were expecting and things like that. And so um, with our son Henry, and then with our third pregnancy, we had ultrasounds very early at like 7 or 8 weeks. And so I had really just found out, or had just taken an at-home test, and then called and scheduled this ultrasound and to meet with our provider. And I it wasn't that long that we knew that we were pregnant. And so the day of the ultrasound, I don't remember exactly the situation, but our Claire and Henry did not have daycare. So and my mother-in-law was going to come, but she wasn't able to get there until a little bit after the ultrasound. So I was just going to bring them with me. And Andy wasn't there because it was just an ultrasound to like check on, our due date, basically, just kind of a standard thing, or a standard for us.
Mhm.
And so it's just like I'm laying there right now. Claire is on one side and Henry's on the other, and they each had these little like bowls of grapes that I had cut up, like all the snacks, right, so that we can do what we need to do and be done here or whatever. So they're munching on snacks, and the ultrasound tech was like, pulling it up on the monitor, and I can never really see what's happening there, or like I don't really envision it until they tell me, and then I'm like, oh, there it is, sort of. And she kind of goes, um, I think I see two. I was like, what is that? What do you mean? And she kind of took her little clicker and kind of highlighted one little area and typed an A. And she like highlighted another area and typed a B. And she's like, there's two babies. And I was just like, oh, okay. I mean, like, what? And so I'm sure that she was like, you weren't expecting that? And I said, no, not at all. And I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. Maybe she thought I was there because I was pregnant with twins, or, I don't know.
Sure, sure.
Um, but anyway, we had a good laugh. And in my experience with ultrasounds anyway, they're just snapping the pictures, and then I will meet with someone afterwards, right? So she's not telling me a ton of stuff, but she is like helping me see very clearly there's two little babies in there. And so after that appointment, then Claire and Henry and I go sit in the little lobby waiting area, waiting to go see my provider for what I thought was going to be just a like, yep, looks good, go home. But it was really like, what did we just learn? And so during that little waiting time, then I called my husband, and he's sitting at his desk in a cubicle amongst other cubicles. And I was like, honey, we are having twins. And he was like, oh. And I mean, he's like coworkers everywhere, in an office setting. He's like, okay, we'll talk about it later. I just think that is literally the most underrated statement ever, because then that's really the only thing we talked about for a long time.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so yeah, and then so we meet with the provider, and what questions? I'm like, I don't know. I have no questions. I have no
Was
questions.
was your mind just swimming? Like you couldn't
I
even think
was,
of what to ask?
yes, I was like, oh my gosh. I don't know that I really could fathom it right at that time, what that meant. And then once we knew kind of what the due date was going to be and how far along we actually were, that kind of changes plans, because twins are considered full term at 38 weeks. So, my actual due date is this date, but we're going to deliver by about this date, and this is our goal to get to, and things like that. So we just kind of talked through like math, I guess. I'm sure that's all she could really. It's like, what else? I have no idea. I'm sure I will have questions. I just don't have them right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
So, yeah, so that was, and then we go home and my mother-in-law meets us there not long after, and she's the first one to see the actual ultrasound picture that I got printed out. And I had sent an email of it to my husband too, but she gets to see it like in her hands, and she was like, Holly, I had a dream about this last night. And I was like, you didn't tell me. And she's like, well, who thinks, and she's like, I had a dream about this. I was like,
You're
that's crazy.
kidding.
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy. And to be honest, that entire pregnancy, I feel like was so, we were so watched over in so many ways. And I just felt such a calm. I don't know that I even still have words for it right now, that just God was just there, um, over the entire thing.
Mm,
Everyone around us was freaking out, and I just never felt like that. And maybe that's kind of like, if you're flying with a person and they're freaked out, and maybe you would
mm,
normally be freaked out, but
mhm.
you try to be like strong or not freaking out for them. Maybe that it was a lot of that too, where, well, we can't all freak out. Somebody has to like
Right,
just
right.
stay calm.
That
Um,
definitely makes sense, but also I wouldn't discount the power of the peace that passes all
absolutely.
understanding. So did you make it
Absolutely.
to term with the twins?
Yes. Okay. So I made it to term plus a little bit extra because
Wow.
yeah. So just the positioning of the boys. Well, earlier on in the pregnancy, when I was, oh gosh, a little past 20 weeks, maybe 24-ish weeks, um, I started to dilate. And so I ended up having a cerclage to like sew me up, I guess.
Mhm.
And so after that, I was on kind of modified bed rest. And so we had an amazing village of our families, and um, we lived about an hour and a half or so, give or take, from where we both grew up in the area that we grew up. And so our families weren't super close, but definitely within driving distance. And so they'd come on the weekends and help with Claire and Henry, um, so that I could just really lay around or,
Yeah.
try to get something small done or whatever. Um, and so but we made it just fine to 38 weeks. And so our daughter turned 4 on May 5th. And then my C-section was scheduled for May 7th. So we were able to get it all planned with, my sister came to stay with our kids, and so that they were still at our house while we were gone. And we had to we actually set our alarm and got up at like, gosh, I don't even remember anymore. It was in the middle of the night to go eat like a giant breakfast at Perkins because then I couldn't eat for 12
Right.
hours or something. And so we went and did that, like our last little date night, I guess, or date morning. And then I took a picture of myself that morning, like last pregnant picture. And, um, but so we are going in for our scheduled C-section, and we get a phone call that if we haven't left already, we can wait because they had some emergency situations coming up, and that mine was going to be getting pushed back a little bit. But we were already on our way, and there was an amazing super Target right next to our hospital. So we just went, and I waddled around Target for one last time. And my husband bought the most random assortment of things. Like he needed some Diet Pepsi for the hospital room, and he needed like, I think we bought Mother's Day cards because it was that it was early May. I
Uh-huh.
think he bought like a golf polo shirt. I mean, just so we didn't know what to do. We were just like walking around, and then, as you do in Target, we spent like $100 or $200, just
Right.
on who knows what. Um, but yes, so we did make it to full term, and um, plus a couple of extra hours, I guess.
Okay.
And yeah.
So walk me back a little bit. You
Mhm,
mentioned that Claire was a little bit premature. How
mhm.
early did she come?
So she was like 36 weeks and 4 days.
Oh,
So just
just
like
shy. Yeah.
just shy of. And so she was 6 pounds 1 ounce when she was born. And actually, both Luke and Will, both of our twins, were bigger than her. when they were born, which is so insane to me. Like she would have just been maybe a dainty girl anyway when she was born,
Yeah.
but yeah, the boys were 7'2" and 7'6", so
Wow.
they were both bigger than she was by herself.
Okay, well, that's essentially what I was getting to. Was I was gonna ask about birth weights and then see
Yeah,
where they fell, but that's amazing.
it's incredible. And I mean, technology and the medical field is so amazing right now that after I had to do my, well, and I say right now, it was 8 years ago, not almost 9 years ago, but um, after the cerclage, we had a lot of monitoring and ultrasounds just to make sure that the boys were still doing okay and watching their positioning. And they had to do these tests, or the ultrasound tech would do these tests where checking their movements within a certain amount of time.
Mhm,
And so we knew that they were growing very, very well. And we knew um, we knew who was going to be bigger than the other. And so it was all very like, it's such a, it's such a miracle anyway,
mhm,
when you think about it, to know that like, that's literally just living. Nothing happens between now and when you're out of my body, right? Like you were
mhm.
7 pounds, 2 ounces in there, and your brother was right there with, it's such a miracle. And it still boggles my mind, really.
So, are they identical or fraternal twins?
We've never had them tested for sure. They both had their own sac and they're both their own umbilical cord.
Mhm.
So it's most likely that they're fraternal, but they look very, very similar. So it would be super rare if they were identical. And I think at some point we'll just swab them or whatever the test is to send in and see. But also, like my husband and I have similar coloring, and like all of our kids look pretty similar. And
Mhm.
in fact, Henry, the our oldest son, he and the twins can look like triplets sometimes if they're all sitting
Oh,
nearby. They
wow.
just have a very similar look. Um, but it was so interesting as the boys grew. They would, all the well child checks and things like that. I mean, they were growing within like an ounce of each other constantly, just no matter. And through the years, in the last couple of years, they've started changing. And, but for years, they were within ounces of each other in weight and within just teeny amount in height. Um, so I am curious if they are identical. It seems like a crazy coincidence if they do just look very similar and have been growing very similarly. But
Yeah,
as far as
that
I know, they're fraternal. So
that's incredible. So, what
yeah.
was it like have the transition from one child to two children is one thing,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
then when you have two babies at one time,
Sure.
that's a transition all on its own, I would
Hmm.
imagine. But then now you have two babies at the same time
For sure.
and two toddlers essentially.
Right. Right.
So what was that like?
So in lots of ways, um, our life is like pre Luke and Will and post Luke and Will, because for lots of reasons that are amazing. And but when I was pregnant with them, I was due with them in May, around like January, February-ish. We started talking with my brother, my younger brother, who lives in the area where I grew up. And it's not far from where Andy grew up too. And he and his wife were kind of contemplating selling their house and maybe doing something different or whatever. And he said, would you and Andy, like, do you plan on moving back here someday? Because we lived about 90 miles away from where we grew up. And I said, I don't know. I kind of always maybe thought about it, but I don't know if that's really in the cards. He's like, well, here's the deal. We're thinking about selling our house. We think it would be, it'd be great for you guys. And of course, we knew the house. We'd been there for
Mm,
Easters and birthday parties and stuff, and always loved the house. Um, and so my brother actually, I think, talked to multiple people about, we think our house would be great for you for this reason or whatever. And so I talked over with Andy, and we both kind of laughed because that's just sort of like my brother can sell things. He's a very good talker, and he just knows people, and he can just talk, he just can do that. And so
mhm.
I feel like at first, Andy and I were both like, that's just his way, but then a little bit of time passed, a few days, and Andy and I were still sort of joking about it. And at one point, Andy was just like, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what this might look like. And so, anyway, long story short, we moved. We were living in St. Michael, Albertville, which is like a little bit out of the metro area. We were living in that area then, and we moved back to central Minnesota when Luke and Will were 6 weeks old, 8 weeks old. So all of this was in progress towards the end of the pregnancy. And then we started working with a realtor to sell our house in Albertville. And we actually got it all ready, and kind of, he helped us stage it a little bit because there's toys everywhere.
Right.
So we got it ready for Memorial Day weekend. So it was a long weekend. We planned to just leave and go stay at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And there was going to be a bunch of showings, and then we'll go from there. And we actually got a phone call that we should come back from our, we should come back from out of town because we had 3 separate offers on our house. And if that's not God being like, this is the right time for you, this is the right decision you're making, like, I'm going to line it up so perfectly that anything that you might think is an obstacle isn't.
Wow.
So that was pretty incredible. And so we went from like a bustling sort of, I mean, Albertville is kind of a small town, but it's a bigger small town.
Isn't that where the strip mall?
Yes, there's an outlet mall there. Yes.
Great. Okay.
And we lived like on the other side of the interstate from the mall. So it didn't feel like craziness where we were.
Sure.
But we both commuted into the metro area for our jobs at the time. And so yeah, it all lined up. I mean, from the smallest thing of like not having to clean up the house a bunch of different times to show the house, to just lining it up so perfectly that it's like Andy's job allowed him to telework before that was really that big of a thing. They were allowing him to do that, and he still went into the office a couple of days a week, even once we moved. And I teleworked for a little while from my previous employer as well. And so things just really lined up in such a way that we knew that moving back was what we were supposed to do. So when I say like pre Luke and Will and post Luke and Will, like post Luke and Will, we're suddenly in a small town where the nearest grocery store is, well, the nearest large grocery store is like 30 miles away. Target's not very close, like just such a different thing than I had gotten used to. And of course I grew up that way, but we had gotten so accustomed to it, especially in my parenthood or in my motherhood journey up to that point. It was super easy to drive 5 minutes to Target or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and plus I worked full time with both Claire and Henry. And then once Luke and Will were born, I took, the summer off, basically, I think is what it ended up being. And then, my previous employer allowed me to work part-time completely from home, basically whenever I could, like in the evenings for an hour or two or whatever, just doing some behind the scenes work that wasn't always that time intensive. And, yeah, so so much changed. And I say all of that because then, because so much had changed, like no one expected really anything from us. The bar was so low. It was like, you're feeding those humans and you are like, they're pretty well dressed for the weather. I mean, great job. And so for a long time, it was, I mean, going to church, all of that stuff, just showing up, we were just applauded. I mean, I feel like everybody should get that all the time.
Right.
Like, because yeah, we're not carrying baby carriers anymore, but it's still a harrowing act to get everyone out of the house. Any size family of any kind, I think we should all just be proud that we're out. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, where are your shoes? I
didn't know I had to tell you that because we have been wearing shoes every time we've left the house your entire life. But yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a
Yes.
story.
It's so crazy. And honestly, it feels like a story to me too, because like I know it and I know we lived it, but it's such a God thing, right? That like I can't make sense of how all of that worked or how we made it out
Yeah.
still feeling happy and in love with each other. And like that I
Oh,
can't.
even even selling a house, and you were talking about, just leaving while there were showings, and I was like, "Oh, that would have been amazing." That is the worst part of selling a
Yes,
house, is pretending like you don't live in the house
right,
while people
right,
are walking through and
right.
trying to decide if they wanna buy it or not, and so
Yes,
how incredible that you were gone for not long at all, 3 offers,
yes.
sell the house and
It
move. The
was
house was already
so.
lined up for it.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
already were familiar with
Hmm.
it. That's just amazing.
It was so incredible. And I think, honestly, during those first few months where we had moved and the boys were babies, and um, anytime I started to feel like, what did we do? Why? What did we do? Um, it all just, I could always just feel peace in that this was exactly what we were supposed to do.
Mhm.
And, it feels hard or it feels, but it would have been hard either way. And so a lot of times I think I had a hard time separating the fact that we're just it's really tough right now. This is a tough season. It's grueling and it's a lot is required of me. And so just thinking back to like there was not a single obstacle in our way. So we were supposed to come back here. Um, that it really made me feel better. Like, okay, I need to stop questioning or wondering or whatever and just this was what we were supposed to do, and now like how are we going to um like build our lives here, really. So
So so how did you build your lives then? Are you working in your small town now?
yes, so it's so funny because once Andy knew that he was going to be able to work from home a majority of the time but still travel in, we actually had this little shed built, because who works from home with 4 kids under 4 without like a real plan? Like you can't
Right.
just sit at the kitchen table. So he works in IT. So we
Oh
had
my
this
goodness, we almost have parallel lives in a lot of ways.
maybe
This is
that's
crazy. Okay, sorry.
that's true. I like that. That must be, I could feel that. That's got to
Right.
be something that I feel. Um but oh, so we had this like little garden shed built and delivered to our house and set like aside from the house and had it all wired up for internet, and we heated it and air conditioned it, and that was going to be like Andy's office shed basically. And so we got a desk in there, and it was very bare bones, but it was exactly what he needed.
Mhm.
And so he worked out there, and I was in the house. And then I would go out there once I was kind of off of my maternity leave, I guess is what I would call it. It doesn't seem like that, but that's what it was. Um, I would go out there at night and I would work on the computer and do whatever I needed to do for my job. And I was working maybe like 10 hours a week or something like that. And so I would come in and help like get everyone to bed if needed or whatever. But then I'd go back out, and we did that for a while. Um, and then, gosh, we did that for a couple of years, I want to say. And then, um, as Claire was entering into school and then Henry was entering into school, I decided like maybe I could try to work full time or a little more than what I'm working right now. So then Luke and Will went into an in home daycare, and I was working more full time hours from home, still with the same company that I had worked for before we moved. Um, and then, oh gosh, a year or so of that. I got a phone call from someone that I knew from the gym who worked at our local public school, and she asked if I was interested in joining her technology team. And I was like, sure, but like I don't have any qualifications to be labeled anything technology at all. This technology job it wasn't going to be like network things or like technology in the way that my husband works in technology. It was going to be more like posting on social media for the school and managing student devices and apps that go on there and just things that go with that. And so, really, something that she was confident that I could learn. I loved her and I loved how she talked about it. And I loved the people I met in my interview. And I knew a lot of people because this is the school I went to. I guess I maybe didn't say that. This
Wow.
is the school that
Wow.
I graduated from. And so I just kind of thought, why not? That sounds, and the boys were 3 at that time. So it felt like, and they had been going to daycare already. So that part wasn't going to change at all. Like they were already doing that. And so I thought, maybe I'll give it a try. Um, Not thinking like it's been a long time since I've had to get up and out of the house and help everyone get up and out of the house. And um, so it was such a, and having Andy work from home was very, very helpful too, because he'd be able to bring for a time, the boys went to daycare in the opposite direction of where we all went to school. And so,
Mm.
he would help with that. And so I've been working at our public school, since the summer of 2018, and that has morphed over the years a little bit. And I'm no longer on the technology team, but I am on the community education team. So I kind of plan community ed events and organize that kind of stuff. So I do not work full time anymore, which is really, really beneficial to our family. Really
Right.
beneficial to our family. But yeah, so it's kind of evolved, and um, it's so fun to work at the school that I went to. Like I was a Jaguar and now my kids are Jaguars and now we're all Jaguars and we're Jaguar pride all the time. And like, um, it's just it's so weird and fun and funny. And there's a few teachers left here still teaching that I had and that my kids will have or have had. Um, and it's just, I don't know, it's so fun. And um, yeah, I really, really, really enjoy it. And that, again, all points back to God making a direct path for us to come back here.
Yeah.
Um, so it really is, and I don't talk about it like this very often. And even now I'm just like, wow, that just really worked out.
It's so fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
pretty good.
so what has life been like as a mom to, a girl entering the teenage years who I'm sure that your sons don't have a sister, they have a second mom, because that's how it is in my house.
In some ways, yes. And it's so interesting because when Luke and Will were born, it was very much like Claire and Henry had their area and their space away from the twins, because I wanted Claire and Henry to be able to play freely and get out toys that maybe Luke and Will couldn't have or whatever. And then Luke and Will would kind of be doing their thing. And so Claire and Henry were just super, super close,
Mm.
and kind of constantly doing things with each other. And then like Luke and Will were sort of like a side attraction or something. It was like they and they were so little. And when I look back on this, I feel like this is one thing that I feel like, man, should I have done that differently? But I did not rely on Claire and Henry really to help in any way. Like I didn't utilize them and like, hey, can you go grab me this? Or maybe a little bit I did, but not to the extent that Claire and Henry thought that they could be helpful. I think I was
Mm.
so like I was very, I felt like I needed to feel like I was in control, which is so ridiculous. But there were so many certain things that I was like, I need to be able to control this situation. And in order for that, you guys go down here and play with your stuff, and the boys and I will stay up here where it's safe and I can gate them in and they can have just
Yeah.
safe toys or whatever. And so, all that to say, I wonder if Claire doesn't feel like she's more like a boss to them and not like a nurturing second mom. She's more like, that is wrong, and here's why.
Yes. Yes.
But which I don't, maybe that's just her way. But she also is like encouraging them and talking with them in her own sort of way. But at the same time, I think she has so much going on. If I ever worry about like, man, she's not showing like nurturing older daughter things or older sister things, but she has so much going on in her life too. Like that is just maybe not something that, she doesn't right now have much interest to babysit, or
Mm,
it's just not quite her thing yet. Um, and who knows, maybe that will change. But she, so I don't often have to like say, no, Claire, I'm the mom. Like I will
mm.
take care of this or whatever. Um, but who knows, that could be coming too.
Yeah.
I can never predict anything.
Right.
So yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And so what would you to moms who find themselves in I won't say, maybe I'll say in unpredictable or surprising situations, whether it's with a sudden birth of or a sudden
Mhm.
pregnancy of multiples, or who are facing a move
Mhm.
or a job change, just anything maybe that they hadn't planned on happening. It's
Mhm.
come up suddenly and they're kind of in the thick of it with their mothering and this new thing. What would you say to
Mhm.
them?
I honestly would say you're doing a great job. You It's okay for you to like slow down for a second and decide what's the most important to you and really pour into that. And it can't be everything. We're going to have to make a choice about what is important, and it's only for a season. It won't last forever. So it's going to be real hard. It might be really hard. It might be harder than you thought. But it's not going to last forever. And you're doing a great job no matter how many things that you can point to that show you're not doing a good job, because we're the hardest on ourselves. Um,
So
you are
true.
doing a great job. And I just really feel like it's so important for us to decide for ourselves what's important for our family and how we want our families to operate and how we want our family unit to be. And it's hard to do that with a lot of noise coming from everywhere else. That's one of the reasons I love this podcast so much, is listening to other moms in so many different areas of life and different seasons and stages. And um, it's it's just so amazing, and it can feel so lonely and so like I'm the only one that this is happening to right now. But when we open ourselves up a little bit, or if we're a little bit vulnerable, or if we allow people to help us when they ask, or just things like that, we're all going through so many of the same things. And so there was such a time where, like I said, the bar was so low for us. Like we would just get a standing ovation for, going to the grocery store with four little kids. And then I kind of, once that didn't happen anymore, once it was like, oh, look at all your cute little kids, then it turned into like, oh, why are those four kids running all over the place? Then it's suddenly like not so cute. And then it's like, but wait, we're still out and we're like respectful and but I felt like I had to portray a certain thing, that
Mm,
we were everything is fine, we're handling it all just fine, like that was unnecessary. That wasn't important to me. I didn't care
mm,
about of outwardly how um our our family was viewed, but I felt some sort of pressure that I should care about that, and I acted in a way that I've got it all under control and I am just fine. I don't need anyone's help. I'm just, um, so that would be my advice, is it's okay if your family, if what's important to your family is different than what's important to other families, and you're allowed to make those decisions for yourself. And even to this day, and that I have to keep reminding myself of that as our seasons change and as our kids get older and as, you know, it's always, it's like a nonstop learning adventure, really. I mean, it's just
Right.
nonstop.
Right.
Nonstop is the key.
So true. And what a poignant tip and pointer for the other moms out there who feel like they're going through the same. I feel like you touched on so much that would resonate so loudly, so strongly with them. So Holly, thank you so much for
Thank
trusting
you.
Tracy and say, I'll
Yes.
do it. It was such a joy to
Yes.
have you on the show today.
I so enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much. And I thank you again for this podcast. I think it's amazing. Amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head on over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.